Welcome to another episode of From the Desk of. I'm Jim Cohen, CEO of Minneapolis Jewish Federation. I just got back from an incredible week in Israel on Tikvatenu 3, a solidarity and service mission, and I'm very happy to have as my guests two of my fellow travelers, Rabbi Alexander Davis and Gail Rosenblum. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
The first thing I want to ask, and I'll ask you, Rabbi Davis, first, what motivated you to join us on this trip? What were you looking for, and just how did you come to join the trip?
The truth is, I'd been to Israel two other times since October 7th, one on a solidarity mission with a group of international conservative rabbis, and another just on a family trip for a simcha. So I'd been to some of the sites. I had an opportunity to explore Israel, but I was really looking forward to traveling with a local group, people with whom we had, Minnesota in common and a relationship already in common, would be able to bring back our experiences to our local community, and also to travel with the Federation to open up opportunities for volunteerism and for conversations that I hadn't experienced in my first trip.
It's terrific. Gail, how about you? What brought you to us?
So unlike Rabbi Davis, I have not been back to Israel in over 30 years, which kind of shocks me when I think about it because I feel so close to Israel. I think after October 7th, I was feeling just an ache to be there. And what drew me was I needed clarity. I felt like it was so hard to really understand what was going on from my, position here in Minneapolis. I felt like I needed to get there and really talk to people. So I think clarity and also connection to the people. I have family there. I was very eager to reconnect with them as well. And this particular trip just was it was just the right size. It was literally, just under 30 people. And in doing this kind of a volunteer mission, just felt so perfect for me to have that experience to be able to re-enter Israel in this way.
Both of you mentioned the volunteer aspect of this trip, and we're going to get into that in a second because I'm very curious to hear your takes on it. But you raised something really interesting that I want to ask you about, and that is that you were hoping to get some clarity as a result of this trip. Did you get the clarity, or did you leave with more questions than answers, or how did that go for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I do feel like I got clarity in the sense of the reason we were there became very clear to me very quickly. And I felt like the reason we were there was to bear witness and to hear those stories and to listen to people. And so in every opportunity we had to volunteer, we were really hands in the dirt, literally, right? We were at many points, but also just hearing those stories from people over and over. I felt like the clarity was evident to me that we were helping them release just a tiny bit of their grief, perhaps, because I do feel like this is a moment where they are just sort of in this excruciating and emotional holding pattern. And I just was so grateful to be there and do what we could. So I think the clarity was to understand that these are strong, fierce people, but they're hurting in a way that's kind of hard to imagine. And just our reason for being there, I think, was really to lessen that burden for them a bit.
Rabbi Davis, I'll ask you the same question in a slightly different way because you have been to Israel since October 7th. And one of the things and we were talking about this earlier, is that people are constantly curious as to how Israel is evolving and how the emotions of the people on the ground are evolving. Did you detect any change from the last time you were there? As someone that's been several times since October 7th myself, I got the sense that while there's still tremendous pain, as Gail said, there is a growing recognition that life does go on and that the Israeli nation is learning how to start to unpack. Did you find that, or what experience did you have?
I think that's true, that Israelis are living kind of a split personality. On the one hand, the cafes and the beaches are full. They are moving on with their studies and with their jobs. And at the same time, it's still October 8th. Everything is up in the air. And there's just a deep wound that hasn't begun to heal.
And I think it's going to take a generation for that to really heal. It's so traumatic. To say it's traumatic is the understatement of our age. And seeing it slowly but surely begin to enter the healing process, I guess, is something of a comfort. Okay, well, we've all referenced the fact that a large part of this trip was service-oriented. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is the opportunity to volunteer specifically with programs that Federation sponsors and funds. And through the generosity of all of our donors, we're able to do that. Amongst things that we did, we picked oranges, we rehabilitated homes, we barbecued for members of the Golani Brigade, and I have to say the food was even better than I expected. And I grilled it, so that should be why I was a little bit surprised. But Gail, tell us a little bit about the volunteer experience that touched you the most.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the concerns I had is are we really going to be able to make a difference in the short time we're there and in the short sort of sections of time that we were allotted to do these things? But I really do feel that we made significant, changes and helped people. And I would say that for me, I participated in what was called Gesta with this young man who had survived the Nova. He had been one of the survivors of Nova. He was at the festival. His name was Yuval Tov, and he was a beautiful young man. And he did tell us his story. So he, after surviving the festival, made a decision to really amp up his nonprofit. And what he does is he brings young people together with the elderly to do home projects and support the elderly. And so we went to this gentleman's home, which was, really just kind of in upheaval. And we cleaned his yard for hours and made a big difference. And then we planted flowers. And the gentleman, it was so interesting. He was sort of watching us the whole time, smoking a cigarette, and he had on these very good-looking Van shoes. It was just sort of this surreal, and he was playing American jazz music. I mean, the whole thing was so surreal, but I feel like from beginning to end, we did something so decent for him, and he was so grateful. And I just was so moved by this young man who made this decision because he got his life back to do something so beautiful for his community. So I think for me, that was, everything we did was meaningful, but I feel like that to me really touched my heart because he was such a young man having such a beautiful vision for what he could contribute.
That's wonderful. And I know that Tikvatenu too, the participants who rehabilitated an elderly lady's apartment are still talking about it. And I've seen the pictures and the before and the after, not just in the apartment and not just in the physical activity that was done, but on the face of the person that's the beneficiary. It's something very special. Rabbi Davis, how about you?
For me, going down to Kibbutz Cholit was very moving. I learned that it's a kibbutz with which we in Minneapolis have a connection through the work of Federation. And we learned down there just a really heart-wrenching story by a mother who lost a daughter who was brutally killed on October 7th. And seeing a once lively and thriving kibbutz essentially abandoned right now until the family's return was also very moving. We had the opportunity to plant trees at the kibbutz, and how wonderful that it happened to coincide with Tu B'Shvat, the time when we celebrate trees in Jewish tradition. But it really felt like we were helping to seed, a future for the kibbutz. Here they are, ready to plant and invest in tomorrow. And so to participate in seeding the next generation of what the kibbutz will have, in store was very moving.
I was very moved by that also, and it was very poetic that the next day some of us picked oranges, and I even posted on my Facebook, one day we were planting and the next day we were picking, and it's because somebody planted those orange trees a generation ago that we were able to do that. And so the metaphor was not lost on me, and it made me feel very good. And to Gail's point, we actually were accomplishing things. This was not necessarily museum culture where they set up things for us to do that had we not done them, it would have made a difference. I'm so glad to hear, Gail, that you think that we did make a difference. For those of you listening who don't know, as Rabbi Davis mentioned, Minneapolis Jewish Federation has a partnership through the Jaffe Communities Together program with Kibbutz Cholit. Right. Cholit is a kibbutz that is 2 kilometers from the Gaza border. It was decimated during October 7th. 95% of the physical plant is no longer usable. More than 10% of the population, unfortunately, perished. And we have made a commitment over the next several years to work with them. And it truly is a labor of love. And I look forward to working even more closely with the folks in Cholit as they rebuild their lives and as they return to the kibbutz. It's really something very special. And getting to hear from Jackie, the mom of someone who passed away that day, is something I will never forget. It was incredibly moving. We've also talked a little bit about spending time in Rehovot, our sister city, and some of these volunteer opportunities took place in Rehovot. We are very intentional of involving Rehovot in every Israel trip that we do because our partnership is one of the best in the Federation system, and there is so much that's accomplished with Israelis and Minnesotans working together. How much, Gail, did you know about the partnership before we traveled together, and what are your takeaways about its power?
So I'm laughing because I knew nothing about the connection, and I was really overwhelmed when we got there, and I realized the connection and how deep it is. And some of the wonderful people on our tour, it was like a family reunion, running into the people they knew in Rehovot, and there's a book club. There's such a depth to it and a history to it, and I fully appreciated that in a way I hadn't before. I did not know about that connection. And it's a lovely place, Rehovot. We spent some time there. We wandered the streets. I thought it was really a beautiful way to connect. And I felt like, the work we're doing for them is very important, but they're also providing a lot of, support and information and collegiality to us here in Minneapolis as well.
Yeah, it's very much a two-way street.
Yeah, it feels that way.
One of the things Daffy had tried to do under the leadership of Natan Sharansky was really expand the notion of Jewish peoplehood being a two-way street, that it's not just those of us in North America sending dollars and volunteering, but that Israel, as the startup nation and as the Jewish homeland, has a lot to offer. Obviously, because we were there to volunteer, specifically because of what happened on October 7th, some of it felt a little one-sided as just because of the itinerary, but I'm glad that the whole notion that it is a partnership came through to you. I know that you've been to Rehovot, Rabbi Davis, because we were both there together during our Israel experience in 2023, but did anything this time around really stick out to you as interesting or inspirational?
Well, there were so many programs that we learned about along the way, kind of one after another. Oh, we're doing this. Oh, and we're also doing this. We had the opportunity one morning to have coffee, which is something our group loved coffee. We spent a lot of time drinking coffee, but this was special. It was called the Shavim Cafe, which was a coffee house that was staffed by adults with special needs, and something that our Minneapolis Jewish community supports. And it was inspiring to see what a difference it makes in the individual lives of these adults as they learn skills and have the opportunity to kind of make a difference in people's lives. And I understand, from you, Jim, that you talk about this as a two-way partnership, ways that they may help us and teach us to bring something like that to our community.
I would very much love to do that. And there are so many of our partner organizations that do so much good with inclusion and folks with special needs, whether it be Sharim or the inclusion program at the JCC or JFCS, that I look forward to trying to tap into that expertise. One of the other themes that really we met with day in and day out was the mental health challenges that folks in Israel are facing. Talking about the cafe, one of the reasons that we gave an additional grant after October 7th was specifically because we didn't want that cohort to fall through the cracks when the entire country was in trauma. We had to make sure that those folks that were working at the cafe and that were benefiting from it didn't lose that. The statistics showing the percentage of people that have sought the help of a mental health professional in Israel, something like almost 60% since October 7th. There's inadequate bandwidth to deal with that, and we at Federation are really prioritizing how we help in that space, including a very significant grant to JDC's efforts in that regard over the next 3 years. One of the places that we all visited together was No Soldier Left Behind, which really does incredible programs one-on-one in Rehovot with soldiers with PTSD. Gail, we talked about, that Israel's in pain and that it's going to take many, many years for these wounds to heal. But did the extent of it surprise you? How did it strike you? And how else do you think we can help in that regard moving forward?
So first, thank you so much for the support for mental health services, because I too was just profoundly moved by that challenge. And one thing that someone said to me that has stuck with me is there is no P. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. These people are not, there's no post yet. They are in the thick of it. And it is incredibly strong and powerful and frightening. And I remember when we were at No Soldier Left Behind, and I remember someone in the group, maybe it was the gentleman who was running the meeting, said, the tsunami is coming. I don't know if you remember him saying that. And I cannot stop thinking about that. And so I'm so grateful that we'll be able to support those programs. I don't think they just can even grasp how big it's going to be because they're in the thick of it right now, sort of moving through it. But I think you said something that's really true, which is this is going to be for some a lifelong challenge. For some it will never be post. And I think it's really something that we need to think about in how we support people who are going through this right now and into the future. But that's what really stuck with me was the tsunami is coming and we just don't even know yet how huge it's going to be.
As a group, we spent some time at the Anu Museum while we were in Tel Aviv, and Rabbi Davis and I both were, I think, taken aback by the painting that was part of the October 7th exhibit, which is of a tsunami. It was very illustrative of exactly what you said, what Rabbi Davis said earlier, that it's October 8th every day, and we're not at the point yet when Israelis don't feel that way. It's this horrible Groundhog Day that it's going to take a lot of time. Rabbi is someone that is in the pastoral care business and who deals with people who have gone through traumatic experiences and have suffered loss. How do you think we as folks here in Minneapolis can make a difference through the partnership or through supporting particular organizations or just letting Israelis know that we're here for them? Any advice on how we can do that?
Well, it was very striking, one after another of the Israelis that we met who expressed their tremendous gratitude for our showing up. In this case, it was showing up physically, but I get the sense that when it's emails and phone calls from relatives or friends in the States, that's also a way to show up. And it meant so much to them. They feel abandoned, and this really helped them feel supported, as Gail said, reduced maybe their pain, in the words of the Talmud, a 60th. And so I think that that's not going to solve their, the mental health crisis, but I do think that it is something that we can all do.
One of the things that we did was we carried letters from school kids from Heilacher and Talmud Torah and schools throughout the community, and the looks on folks' faces, and some of them, these are hardened combat soldiers in the IDF, and to hand them these hand-drawn little cards with rainbows and smiles, and I'm thinking of you, brought them to tears, which brought, I assume, all of us to tears. We had a lot of interaction with IDF soldiers. I mentioned the barbecue that we did. We also visited wounded warriors in the hospital. Rabbi, I'm curious what impressions they left with you and if there was a takeaway from spending time with them that you want to share.
Well, we heard after the barbecue, a couple of us went on to the base. We were there to daven Mariv, to visit their synagogue. And on the way out, we spoke to one of the soldiers who told us a bit of the backstory of the kibbutz and what happened on October 7th, how there was a whole group of young conscripts who were basically told to stay in a particular place on the base where a small group of veterans were struggling to kind of hold back the onslaught of Hamas. And the very gate through which we passed, one of the soldiers fought valiantly for 7 hours until his very last bullet, and eventually he perished. And we were told by the person who was giving us the tour that his death is tragic and it leaves a gaping wound. And we also focus on all of the lives that he saved. And that to me really sort of struck a chord in Israelis and kind of our Jewish sensibility of both remembering Zachor, but also looking forward.
For those of you who don't know, I'm a history student for life, and I'm reminded, Rabbi, by something that I read once. There is a memorial in Rangoon, Burma, and it was erected by the British Army. They suffered tremendous losses in trying to hold back Japanese forces that were threatening the civilian population. And the last line of the poem on that memorial says, "For your tomorrow we gave our today." And I think that speaks to the sacrifice that so many people, unfortunately, were asked to give and gave freely because of their love, not only for the state of Israel, but for the Jewish people. Gail, thoughts?
There were two moments that I remember most, and one of them was a moment of levity. There were these 4 young soldiers who were standing by that tank, and so we wandered over to visit with them, and they were asking us, "Where are you from?" And Minneapolis. And one of them kept saying, "Wolves, wolves." And I thought, what's he talking about? Oh, timber wolves. So here we are, timber wolves. So there was sort of this sweet moment. But the other thing that stuck with me was I was asking one of the soldiers, "How are you doing? How could you possibly be doing?" But his response was to comfort me. And it was such a strange moment. And he was just saying, everything's going to be is it going to be all right? We're doing all right. And it was such a tender, beautiful moment and such a surprise because really we had been there to support them, and we were doing that all night long. But I'll never forget that. He could see my concern and was making sure that I knew that they were going to be all right.
That really is Jews looking out for each other.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, we're almost out of time, and I can't thank both of you enough for joining me today. The fact that we've been talking about Tikvatenu 3 means that there was a Tikvatenu 1 and a Tikvatenu 2, and we continue to ramp up our Global Experiences program. I don't know if there'll be a Tikvatenu 4, but certainly we are going to Israel and visiting Jews around the world. That's one of the great joys that I have, and one of the responsibilities of Federation is to connect our Minneapolis community with the global Jewish world. So I'd like to end with the same question to both of you, and that is, why should someone travel to Israel now? If you had to give them the quick elevator pitch, what would you say to them? And Gail, we'll start with you.
Go now, because it is a moment in history where you land in Israel, as we did. You will feel the power of being there, the importance of being there, and there is really so much you can do right now to support our people and our families.
Thank you. Rabbi, how about you?
Well, there's just no difference, tremendous difference between seeing Israel firsthand and reading about it in the paper from Minnesota. It's a completely different experience, a different way of learning and understanding and feeling what Israel is in this moment. So that's one reason, is for your own self. And the other is for Israel, because they need us right now. And so that's what we do. We show up.
And we will continue to show up. I thank both of you for showing up here today. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you. And till next time, I shall be at the desk of. Bye now.